Sorry if I've lost a little voice here, but I tell you, it is great. Cell phones.
That's a clock tower.
At the time.
I'm in the gang of 6.
What time is it? Democrats' time! Well, I am, again, sorry about the voice. I literally, about an hour and a half ago, just got off the plane back from a trip to the Middle East. And I was in Israel, I was in Egypt, I was in Djibouti. Do you know actually, how many of you all know where Djibouti is? I know that's right.
Never
How many of you know who the head of Djibouti is?
This week?
The head of Djibouti is Sheikh Booty. Not really, but you know. But, you know, in Egypt in particular, we were there just as the election results were starting to be announced. And to see this nation, oldest civilization in the world, literally for the first time in its 5,000-year history, start down the path to democracy is remarkable. A lot of exciting, extraordinary things. They're going to have their presidential runoff on June 16th and 17th, and we all hope and pray they can make this transition to democracy in an appropriate way. But it also brought home to me some of the challenges. There are forces in Egypt right now coming out of particularly some of the members of their new parliament that were proposing some things that were pretty remarkable. Proposing things like dramatic restrictions on women's rights. Proposing things like trying to lower the marriage age down to about 13. Trying to restrict and limit women's participation in society, business, and the electoral process. So I was there and I'm thinking, man, I gotta get home. I gotta come home. And then I come home and pick up the newspaper and see the United States House of Representatives just this past week, with all the problems we're facing, was trying to put in place their top priority, more restrictions on a women's rights to choose. Now, I'm going to tell you, it makes me kind of shake my head and wonder, and I know we've already heard from Bobby and Jerry and Jim, but I know they've head off, but we need to give them another round of applause for continuing to fight against those interactions. You know, I have been in the Senate now almost 3 years. You've heard this before from me. It's a little bit of a transition. I've gone from being His Excellency, the Governor of the Commonwealth, to being the junior senator in an institution that 90% of Americans think is dysfunctional. And I'm part of the 90%. I've never served as a legislator before, as we try to grapple with how America comes back, issues of economic competitiveness, trying to make sure that we take on in a rational way our debt and deficit. The challenges are overwhelming. So we owe a great debt of gratitude, not just to Bobby and Jerry and Jim, and we need to re-elect them, but also send additional Democratic House members from the Commonwealth of Virginia to get the House of Representatives back in Democratic control. But we also need, if you're not listening up, I'm going to start throwing this at somebody. We also need, and I know last night, this convention, we Democrats paid a real tribute to my friend and my partner, Jim Webb. You know, you can say a lot of things about Jim Webb, but Jim Webb is an American original. There are very few people who brought his remarkable background to serving in the Senate. He's a patriot, he's an intellectual, he's a man who's devoted his whole life to serving our country. Jim has been a great working partner in the Senate. There has been no one in the United States Senate, Democrat or Republican, who garners more respect from both sides of the aisle when he speaks about our national security or military issues. And there are literally millions of veterans that have returned from Iraq and Afghanistan, getting the educational opportunities they deserve because of the great work of Jim Webb. We all know Jim also took on a conversation that wasn't on anybody's kind of top of their to-do list. Something that all of us know needs to be a subject of debate, an honest and open discussion of our criminal justice system. Something that is long overdue. Now, I am sure there are more chapters that Jim will have to write in his life and in his service to our country. But join me again in giving a big round, Democratic round of applause to my friend, our President. Especially since all of you are outside still eating lunch. Of course, the fact that Jim is leaving does give us two wonderful opportunities. One is, I get to be senior senator. And the other is, in about 155 days, we have a chance to send another great Virginia Democrat to be my partner, Tim Kaine. Most of you have seen the Mark and Tim show along the campaign trails over the last 10 years. Tim and I have known each other for over 30 years. We met at law school. He became a lawyer. I became a client. We've seen our families grow up. Tim and Ann and Lisa and I. We know each other socially. We've seen our kids grow up together. And I have to tell you that this individual brings a remarkable, and we're going to hear from him in a couple of minutes, a remarkable background and sense of purpose. The United States Senate. He served as a city councilman. He served as a mayor. He was a civil rights lawyer. He was lieutenant governor to a former governor. He served with incredible distinction as the 70th governor of our Commonwealth. And in many ways, I think Tim thought after that period of service that he and Ann were going to continue to serve, but maybe not through elective office. But when Jim decided not to run again, Tim reflected back upon the enormous challenges that we all face in this country, in our Commonwealth, and I can assure you, coming back from this trip around the world,
It's got a one on that thing.
and Tim Kaine was willing one more time to step up, carry our banner, and I can assure you, in a Senate where we need more people with conscience, in a Senate where we need more people with a commitment to social justice, in a Senate where we need more people who are about getting stuff done, I need Tim Kaine as our next senator. Not just we need. You know, somebody else said this at one point, is I have gotten some criticism at times because I'm always trying to figure out ways to find some common ground and get things done. You know, one of the things about Tim is he, as governor and throughout his career, has always been willing, when the issue was right, to try to find a bipartisan solution. I'm not going to call out the name of his opponent, but have you ever heard the word common ground, bipartisan, and Tim Kaine's opponent in the same sentence? The last thing the United States Senate, or the last thing the United States Congress needs, is one more guy up there simply trying to gum up the works and be part of that caucus of none. Because elections do matter. You know that because you're willing to give up a Saturday afternoon to come here and elect delegates so we can re-elect our great president, so we can choose who's going to stand for us as Democrats. But I gotta tell you, if you were down where I work each day, you would see how broken Congress is. The House of Representatives is being won literally by a crowd that would say no to anything President Obama would put forward, except their tax cuts. In the Senate, we have Republican Senate leadership that literally says their top priority is to defeat our president. Not to put forward their views, but simply to defeat our president. Now, in a world as complicated, complex, and challenging as that's not the kind of leadership we need. And one of the things that has been particularly disturbing, and I know you've heard from our great members of the General Assembly a little bit earlier, but for a long time, Mark Carey, it used to be that I could say that things were so wacky in Washington that it even made Richmond look sane when the General Assembly was in session. You know what? I can't say that anymore. Well, this past session, our Democrats in the General Assembly, while their numbers were down, were still trying to fight for jobs and economic growth and equal opportunity. The other side was putting forward an agenda that, quite frankly, had nothing to do about moving Virginia forward. You know, I remember, and Tim and I took enormous pride. You've all heard it from us time and again, where we would get up and talk about Virginia, best managed state, Virginia, best state for business, Virginia, the best state for a lifetime of educational opportunities. That was a Virginia we can all be proud of. Now where we hear Virginia talked about is the brunt of jokes on Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert. That's not the Virginia that we have fought for so many years. You see, I think Virginians, we may have been defeated the ballot box the last time around, but not this time, and that tide is turning. Because we've seen that elections do matter. You've heard this litany. But in a moment when literally millions of Egyptians for the first time ever are trying to exercise their right to vote, to put their country on the path to democracy, Republicans and this governor led an effort to try to restrict folks' right to vote here in Virginia. When we were trying to say that We, the party of true family values, recognize that families come in all sizes and shapes and colors and distinctions. And we were saying that the other side in the General Assembly was trying to restrict the ability of gay families to adopt foster children. And Virginia, when Virginia was talked about as one of those leading states, cutting edge, attracting business, having great human capital, having educational institutions that were the envy of the world, the Republicans in the General Assembly passed a personhood bill that even the folks in Mississippi rejected. And I don't even want to go there on the question about ultrasounds. Now, you would think after that kind of sorry record and that kind of rejection that most Virginians felt about the actions of this General Assembly, they would have learned. But it was almost like, hey, if you didn't get the message, what their agenda is, in Congress or in Richmond, it was reinforced when we had the veto session recently. And once again, Virginia made not just headlines in Richmond or Norfolk or Roanoke or even here in Washington, but when a judge was put forward, not by Democrats, but by a Republican member of the General Assembly, a judge that no one questioned his qualifications, in the dark of night, with literally half of the Republican members of the General Assembly simply being absent, that judge was voted down not because of his competency, but simply because that judge was gay. That is not the Virginia. That is not the Virginia that for the last 2 decades we have fought to make. And again, so it's a question that elections matter. And you know, we in Virginia, we don't ever get any time off. You know, every year, every one of us come before you, and usually we wait until that last weekend in October, and we're doing the get out the vote rallies, and we say, you know, this year the election is more important than ever. Well, this time we're not lying. This year, the stakes for our community, our commonwealth, our country, and for that matter, the world, the stakes have never been clearer. So when we leave this hall in an hour or so, we get out and think about door knocking and phone calls and other things you've got to make over the next couple of months. Remember these messages. Remember that elections do matter. Now we're going to see an onslaught from the other side unlike anything we've ever seen before. One of the worst Supreme Court decisions of not only our lifetime, but probably back to things like Plessy versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court has opened the funnels for literally hundreds of millions of undisclosed dollars being flooded into super PACs. They're going to try to distort, change, and completely manipulate the message. Now, we cannot allow the other side to get away with rewriting history. I can tell you this. We all remember the final months of the Bush administration. We all remember when our economy was in total freefall. We all remember when we were on the brink of the economic abyss. Now, I wish we had come further, but in 3.5 short years, we turned this house from burning down to rebuilding a solid foundation. We've seen through the actions of our president an economy that has went from losing 8 million jobs to an economy that's gained 4 million new private sector jobs by the actions of the president and right-thinking members of Congress. Now, we're not there, listen. Those numbers don't mean much if you're unemployed. And we all saw and were disappointed by the jobs numbers that came out yesterday. But I know a little something about business and meeting the payroll and starting and creating jobs. The Romney approach, the Republican approach, the trickle-down approach, the I got mine to heck with you approach will not create jobs or get this economy moving. We've got to make sure we don't forget. And as somebody you all know, I am obsessed about this debt and deficit, and we have to put a plan in place. But you can't cut and tax your way out of this plan. You've also got to have a growth plan. You've got to grow jobs as well. You've got to be willing to invest. We have that kind of approach. The president does. There is even a bipartisan group in the Senate does. But instead, what do we see from the other side? We see the Speaker of the House 2 weeks ago try to restart the whole debate on debt ceiling roulette. The last time, which brought us to the brink of a complete economic collapse that caused a downgrade in our debt rating. That kind of irresponsible action is not going to lead America, and for that matter, the world, out of the economic challenges. Our president, Barack Obama, knows that if America is going to maintain and grow its economic opportunity, we've got to invest. So, with no help from the other side, we've started making investments once again in clean energy and the R&D that will create the intellectual capital that will drive our economy. This president knows as well that we've got to have an economy that not just creates ideas and intellectual capital, but we've got to have a manufacturing economy. We've got to make stuff again in this country. And right, and I would say, it's been a long time on the business side, you know that. But even I was astonished when you saw into the guts of what had happened in our financial system. The kind of irresponsible actions. And again, over great opposition from virtually every Republican member of Congress. Remember, it was this president, Barack Obama, who put in place new rules of the road for Wall Street, so we won't have the kind of financial meltdown we saw in 2008. And while it was a messy problem and a challenging way to get there, it was this president who finally took the first real step, the step that was started with Harry Truman and went through Democrat and Republican alike, to say that it's just not right for 30 million Americans to go without health care. To put in place the first step towards health care reform. So we've come a long way, and we can't turn back. And more than ever, and one of the challenges going to be here in Virginia, is the face of our country and the face of this Commonwealth is changing. Our country is best when everyone has a seat at the table. And that means that sometimes those voices may have a different accent. So we know as well that nuestro país prospera cuando todos tenemos un asiento en la mesa. For 40 years, you know, we in Virginia, when it came to presidential elections, were kind of an automatic, put it over there in the red column. Well, in 2008, we showed who could elect a president. It was Virginia. All the eyes of the nation will be on Virginia for the next 5 months. We in Virginia will elect the next president of the United States. We in Virginia will determine who controls the United States Senate. You know what? In 2008, we changed the guard. In 2012, We need to guard the change and keep moving forward. Let's do it, Virginia Democrats. Let's elect Barack Obama. Let's re-elect Tim Kaine.